Okay, today we're going to cover the Mongols, but before we get to it, we need to deal with the transition to Mongolian rule. Now, the last time we covered China, Tang rulers viewed Buddhism as a threat. And with Confucian principles gaining its grip on Chinese culture, Buddhism became identified as foreign with too much wealth and influence. And likewise, Taoism, with its emphasis on spiritual unity with nature, threatened the life of consumption brought about by prosperity. The Tang sought to eradicate both religious traditions, criticizing them as undermining basic familial values. Now, as the Tang expanded trade relations, it encountered a rising state-centered militaristic society in present-day Mongolia known as the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs moved from ecologically sensitive subsistence communities based on a horse culture to surplus-producing market centers as a result of their interaction with the Silk Road. Now, primarily residing north of the Gobi Desert, these Turkic-speaking peoples ruled over a powerful empire between 744 and 840 of the Common Era. Its capital was Karavalgasun on the upper Oran River in Mongolia. The Uyghurs presided over flourishing commercial centers and agriculture. When the Tang dynasty was weakening in the mid-8th century, Uyghurs were hired as mercenaries to assist in the suppression of rebellions. Between 755 and 763, the Uyghurs saved the dynasty, and in return, they exacted a very high price. Now, along with rich payments of silk and other Chinese goods, they secured substantial military, diplomatic, and political influence. But to the Tang, the Uyghurs were viewed as unreliable allies, quite prepared to turn on them as suited their purpose. According to one historian, one of the most important of all aspects of diplomatic relations between Tang China and the Uyghurs was marriage between Chinese princesses and Uyghur rulers. And indeed, the sending of princesses to marry foreign rulers was a very common feature of the Tang's court's diplomacy. Now, together with trading silk for horses, it was one of the most important ways of preserving peace along the northwestern borders of Tang China. With time, as the Tang weakened their grip on China, the Uyghurs arrived to overthrow the dynasty in 907, leaving disorder and division in its wake. Now, after 50 years of political partition, Zhao Guangyin, with the support of military commanders in 960, are going to take the throne and immediately started the process of reunification through the implementation of the civil examination system. Now, the effective use of scholar officials strengthened the central power of the state. And China, under the Song or Sung dynasty, extended China's golden age, enjoying a 300-year period of economic and cultural prosperity and achievement. The Song improved and expanded on the technological achievements of the Tang, namely printing and gunpowder. Printing achievements assisted in the creation of the world's first printed paper money called jiaozi. You can consult the textbook to appreciate Song's achievements in canal infrastructure, in the smelting of iron, steel, and copper, and in the engineering feats of its commercial revolution. The Song era witnessed an economy based on both agriculture and manufacturing. The Song combined the politically dominant North with the economically productive South through the efficient use of the Grand Canal. Silver coinage, along with paper money, allowed for specialization in and distribution of farm products and expansion in silk, cotton, and porcelain production. Now, the resurgence of Confucian principles, the resurgence of Confucian patriarchy, and its misogynistic ideals reinforced for Chinese women subservience. Despite their legal rights, property rights, and rights to inheritance, the practice of foot binding, according to historians writing of the preparation, was first carried out on young girls in Tang Dynasty. Then it was popularized and expanded amongst the upper classes in the Song. The exercise involved restricting women's normal foot growth to make their feet as small as possible. One historian writes that foot binding was considered an attractive quality. The effects of the process were painful and permanent. Widely used as a method to distinguish girls of the upper class from everyone else, and later as a way for the lower classes to improve their social prospects, the practice of foot binding would continue right up to the early 20th century. The smaller the feet, the more attractive they were, even erotic for some, and it became a distinct mark of elegance. Now, as the elite ensured women were weak yet attractive, subsequently, foot binding was performed on girls of all classes. And the widespread nature of this practice by aristocrats meant that the lower class parents saw foot binding as an opportunity to raise the prospects of their own children. And eventually, the trait became something to take careful note of by parents arranging the marriage of their son. Tiny feet, despite the origins amongst dancers and courtesans, came to symbolize not only elegance, but also moral virtue and modesty. There thus developed a certain peer pressure amongst families to perform the process on their daughters or risk not finding them eligible husbands. And these economic and social pressures put heavy burdens on the majority of families. Female infanticide became a widely practiced demonstration since a baby girl, especially one whose feet were going to be bound, wasn't going to be able to help with hard agrarian labor and was only going to cost her parents a dowry to marry her off. Now, the increasing internationalization of China's commerce led to a cumulative presence of China in the South China Sea, in Southeast Asia, in India, and in Yemen. And likewise, Song dynastic expansion was paralleled with an era of Muslim expansion. Africans, Arabs, Persians, Indians, Southeast Asians, and Chinese intermingled in the cosmopolitan centers, urban societies that were teeming with merchants, scholars, and working-class migrants representing diverse ethnicities. The textbook provides you the backdrop to China's territorial extent. Song emperors tolerated non-Chinese control over parts of northern China, most notably the Liao dynasty and then the Jurchen invaders. Tibet and the far western territories formed part of the Uyghur Empire, dominating much of Central Asia. Meanwhile, Vietnam and Korea asserted their independence against Chinese rule, and Manchuria to the northeast broke away from Chinese control. So when we get to China's northern problems, these problems were associated with the north-led Song rulers, and just like their Tang predecessors, they recruited mercenaries to assist in the defeat of the Jin dynasty, who had taken over the Liao dynasty and invaded Kaifeng in 1127. So with Mongol assistance, Huizong, the northern Song emperor, was able to flee the Song capital at Kaifeng and reestablish his administrative unit deeper to the south at Hangzhou. Eventually, and within the span of 60 to 70 years, the Jin dynasty gave way to Genghis Khan and the Mongols. And by 1279, Mongols under Kublai Khan wrested final power and established the Yuan dynasty, marking the first time and only time that China was conquered in its entirety by outsiders. The Mongols appear as a destructive conquering force in history, yet their eventual control of the exchange markets opened up interregional trade on an unprecedented scale never before witnessed in the course of this study. The Mongol emerged in the steppes of Central Asia and in and around the Gobi Desert. They formed ecologically sensitive subsistence societies where both men and women shared responsibilities and developed skills in sheep and goat herding, hunting, and most importantly, the horse culture. Over time, they developed into regional kingship systems and competed for power, challenging the suzerainty of Turkic-speaking peoples, at times controlling portions of northern China. Leadership was granted to Khans, or rulers, who ultimately were masters of wealth and military skills. Now, women were instrumental in management and negotiation of both economic and political affairs, with evidence revealing women to be mounted warriors participating in battle. Their excellence in horse culture gave them insurmountable advantages in warfare, efficiently covering long distances, attacking with surprise and accuracy with bows and arrows. Infantry opponents suffered defeats, while those in walled strongholds were starved into submission through Mongol control of the surrounding countryside. Now, historians agree, and the textbook reveals, that the greatest ruler in world history goes to Chinggis Khan. Now, his original name, Temujin, was changed in 1206 at a meeting of the Kuralte, the Grand Council of Elders, at the capital of Karakorum, where he accepted the title of Great King, or Chinggis Khan. Now, born into a period of intense warfare, Temujin developed into an expert marksman and cavalry leader. And through organizational brilliance, ferocity, and ruthlessness, Temujin brought discipline, unity, and a command structure to an army that became tough, fast, and efficient. He earned the title Chinggis Khan, combining traditional fighting methods with propaganda, using both light and heavy cavalry, making lightning-fast strikes, and incorporating Chinese inventions such as gunpowder and guns. He deliberately spread rumors about Mongol bloodthirst, instilling fear in opponents who knew of the Mongol reputation in battle and siege, winning battles and cities without a shot having to be fired. There are many apocryphal quotes attributed to Chinggis. For example, "My greatest joy is in victory, to conquer enemies, to pursue them and steal their possessions, to make their women cry, to ride on fast horses, and return to my wife and daughters." Now, I provide you one quote on my t-shirt. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Chinggis Khan was Chingon. You did not want to upset him or get in his way. The Mongols purposely used terrorism, destroying enemies, sparing none. Towns that were resisted were slaughtered after defeat, including women and children. Between 1206 and 1227, Chinggis Khan unsuccessfully attacked China, decimated the Turks and the Persians, crossed the Caspian Sea to strike fear into the Russians, who called the Mongols people from hell, Tartars. Under the Great Khan, the Mongols controlled Mongolia, northern China, Turkestan, Afghanistan, Persia, and Russia. And with his death and short-lived success in China, the first phase of Mongol conquest ended. Now we get into the phases of conquest in the Mongolian Empire. And the second phase was the conquest of Russia, led by one of Chinggis's grandson, Batu. By reducing Kiev to rubble, Batu forced Russian princes to pay tribute as vassals, establishing the Khanate of the Golden Horde. The third phase was the takeover of Persia and Iraq in 1251 and the destruction of Baghdad in 1258 under another one of Chinggis's grandsons, Hulagu. Mongols plundered one of the greatest cities of the world, killing 80,000 inhabitants, thus ending the Abbasid dynasty in Iran. And after a defeat by a combined army of Islamic Mamluks and Christian crusaders at Ain Jalut in Palestine, Hulagu stopped expansion and established a dynasty known as the Il-Khans. Now, the remaining Muslim lands were spared. The final phase of conquest took several years. Kublai Khan, or Kublai Khan, the most illustrious grandson of Chinggis, made advances on China and battled from 1235 to 1271 to complete the conquest of China. Kublai Khan introduced the Yuan dynasty. So, as the textbook reveals, it would be easy to assume that the Mongol war machine brought nothing but destruction to the great civilizations of Islam and China. But once war ended, The Mongols put their skills to the task of governing an enormous empire. And it began with Genghis Khan when he created a capital at the city of Karakorum, known as Beijing today. He consulted Chinese Confucian scholars, Muslim engineers, and Taoist holy men to build the city. He implemented a policy of religious toleration and protected the people of the empire and its trade routes. And this protection revitalized commerce of the Silk Road and established interregional connections between Asia, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It was Genghis Khan's grandsons that ushered in a century of what is known as Pax Mongolia, or Mongolian peace. And their conquests reopened the silk trade that had been shut down by centuries of warfare. Historians view this impact on world history as substantial. Critical technologies passed from China to the West, paving the way to the early European modern age. The spinning wheel, the compass, gunpowder, guns, and rockets entered Europe, allowing them eventually to forge commercial empires that spanned the globe. Batu allowed for the Russians to maintain their traditions and beliefs in Orthodox Christianity. Hulagu remained tolerant of the Persian and Iraq subjects' faith, eventually converting to Islam. And then when Kublai Khan completed the conquest of China in 1279, he relied heavily on Chinese institutions for help in governing, eventually reinstating examinations. Muslims from the western region of the empire were brought in for governmental bureaucracy and development. Religious tolerance allowed for the resurgence of Buddhism and Taoism. Now, the textbook reveals how reliance on foreigners rather than native Mandarin elites led to Marco Polo's employment in Kublai Khan's court from 1275 to 1292. With the death of Kublai Khan came the fragmentation of the empire. The Chinese began to resist Mongolian cultural influence, despising the use of foreign officials rather than Chinese, and criticizing Mongolian assistance to the artisan and merchant classes, which ran counter to Confucian principles. The Confucian scholarly gentry class of China influenced anti-Mongolian sentiment in public opinion. And meanwhile, Russia and the Middle East began separating from the Mongols, seeking autonomous rule. Christian subjects in Russia and the Near East, Muslim subjects in the Middle East and India, and Buddhist subjects in China and Tibet multiplied their rebellions against Mongol rulers, so that by the late 1300s, China and Persia, and in the early 1400s, the Near East and Russia overthrew Mongol rule, and with their passing, the Silk Road disappeared from history. Now, there was one brief moment of resurgence in Mongol rule, and it was led by a Turk called Timur the Lane, or Timurlenk, or Timurid, or Tamerlane in 1379. He carved out an empire from Persia, the Fertile Crescent, India, and southern Russia, striking fear with swift cavalry attacks and vengeance. He was a convert to Islam, yet followed a path of devastation that was counter to the religion. Historians do not treat him kindly, as he left behind only death and ruin, serving no purpose beyond conquest for its own sake. After his death in 1405, the empire fell into civil war between his army commanders. So thus ends the history of the vicious, ferocious, cruel, and bloodthirsty Mongol conquerors. Now let's take a look at their legacy. Let's take a look at their legacy. Okay? This is their legacy. Now, first, they invigorated interregional connections between Asia, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. The Chinese were forced to build the Great Wall as a defense against their depredations. Their conquests in the West forced Germanic and Turkic groups to migrate west, contributed to the destruction of Western Roman Empire and the unsettling of the Eastern Islamic Empire. So those who were conquered learned how to centralize power over diverse peoples and territories. So what the Mongols did was started the engine that ushered in the modern period of world history. So please watch the documentary that concludes this presentation.